Welcome back to another teaser. In this episode, Greg Shaw is back for a third time. And we started with a pretty simple question. How well are companies actually doing with AI right now? And the answer is, well, not that great. Most organizations are at a C minus. But at the same time, there's a small group of people inside every company who's already getting a lot of value out of AI. They're just figuring out kind of on their own. And I think that's what gets really interesting, because it's not that AI isn't really working. It is that it's not showing up in the organization. So the question then becomes, what do you do with that? Go check out the full episode. Hope you enjoy it.
Hi, my name is Greg Shove. I'm the CEO of two AI companies, and I spend my life Monday to Thursday in corporate America, where it's one tail of AI, which is like, hey, this is sort of useful, but not great. And then Friday to Sunday, I live in San Francisco, where everybody can't live or work without AI. So we're going to talk today about the tale of two AIs.
I mean, what a treat to have the first three-peat in Greg Shove. I mean, of all people we've talked to, he's a worthy three-peater, right?
He's such an interesting person. You know what? I mean, I think a lot of us, we work a lot with how do we get AI into the organizations. And there is this kind of like almost camaraderie of people that are on the front line. I mean, they're like, well, what does work? What doesn't work?
We've touched the orb. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I think we all I think this is all this race for the holy grail of figuring out how do we best take this new technology and put it to good use. And we're all just trying all these different ways. And so, I mean, for me, I'm very energized talking to a person like him.
Definitely comrades in arms, that's for sure. I thought I'm just rattling through a bunch of stuff because I know we've got a bunch of things on our mind. But I mean, the insights per minute, one of the highest, I think, of any guest, because Greg just has so much experience, he has so much exposure across so many different areas. One of the things that struck me was his comment, can you imagine giving one of your children a smart AI and one of your children a dumb AI? I think it's so obviously wrong and no parent would do it. And yet we see it all the time in organizations. This department can have good AI. This department, we're not going to give any access at all to. And it's so, I realize there's dangers to treating companies like families. Companies aren't families. But to Greg's point, marketing's working with sales, operations and product development they're going to know if one department has dumb AI, they know it. And that will create a class system in the organization. And furthermore, you almost negate the value of smart AI. If a team working with smart AI is collaborating with a team that works with dumb AI, the cumulative outputs, I don't think are going to rise to the level of the smart AI. I think they're going to fall to the level of the dumb AI. What do you think?
I think that's true. I think the other thing that he pointed out that resonated with me is that 10-15% of everybody in an organization are pretty good at it. And the kind of super users and then you have like the rest. And what the rest does not need, which I think you guys both picked on, was they don't need to learn how to prompt better or to learn to do these more generic things. What they need to learn is how to do their job better with AI, right? And so they're looking to not kind of go from the abstract understanding of how to use this tool in a generic way and then apply it myself to my job. They almost need much more specific to say, hey, if you sit in this type of job and you're doing this type of function, here's like a use case that is very useful for a lot of other people. Now try to, train on that. And so I think a lot of us, we want to give people the fishing rod and teach them to fish generically. But I think maybe an unlock for a lot of organizations is that you just kind of go much more specific. I say as a statement, but I mean as a question.
Start to do this here. Yeah, I think that's right. And I really like your comment. I don't know if you realize you were making it, but the comment that the goal isn't to learn AI. The goal is to be even more effective in your work.
True.
And I've started kind of using that language in some of my training programs and things like that. My goal is not to help you learn AI. That's, it's the means. The end is you more effective, more enabled, more quality, more joy, right? And learning how to collaborate with AI is a means to that end, but the end can't be working with AI. The end is actually doing whatever you do better.
And then I think the second thing, which I'm stuck on, and I think you mentioned it also in one of the other episodes, but it is interesting, is when people start to become more efficient or even a little bit better doing their job with AI, where does that extra time, energy,
Uh,
where does that go? And you were talking about the Parkinson, was that the Parkinson?
Parkinson's law. I mean, to me, it was very pointed when you said what you ask your bark team. That's incredible. That's evidence right there of Parkinson's law. I don't know if it's Parkinson's law necessarily, but to me, that was a great story. But anyway, you were saying about Parkinson's law, please.
Yeah, but I do think that I think a lot of us are now trying to figure out where does this extra time go and how
Mhm.
do we, and I think what he was saying, which I think is an interesting point, is that that is not necessarily the company's time. I realize it's on their dime, but maybe, we pushed organizations so hard that what you really need is to give that time back to people to think about how do we get into growth mode again in a lot of these organizations. That
Yeah.
the time shouldn't just be sucked away and then yielded into kind of like higher EBIT. It should be how do you become like a better organization, more robust organization, one that grows faster.
Well, it's an age-old problem. I mean, this was true long before AI, that people it's a lot easier to make improvements than it is to do something new.
Hmm.
I like what he said about cut versus create. And you think about cutting as it's Six Sigma, it's process, it's standardization, and folks that's a kind of a known area. And solving a known problem is a lot harder than identifying a new problem and creating from whole cloth. It's a very different challenge. And so this, in a way, AI is bringing to a fine point the classic challenge of explore and exploit.
Hmm.
Organizations, I mean, that's like Jim March's theory from the 70s. Organizations are designed to exploit. That's their job, to exploit an existing market, existing capabilities, existing resources, et cetera. And that's at odds with exploration. And the way you deploy resources when you're exploring is different. And I love March's kind of classic line. He says, the organization that only exploits generally suffers obsolescence, is to say they go bankrupt, right? But it's really hard. I mean, that's where maybe, we talked about having experts on the pod, maybe an interesting expert, Henrik, I'm just riffing real time here, not to make any promises to our audience, but my good friend and hero, Charles O'Reilly, he's the author of Organizational Ambidexterity. I mean, it's the kind of the quote unquote solution to the innovator's dilemma, so to speak. But he's a really interesting thought leader. And he and I have created a new AI course at Stanford, which is probably coming out in February ish. But he was being an interesting expert, not because of his knowledge of AI, but because of his deep understanding of this fundamental tension. And the AI moment is bringing that tension to a fine point, and it's exposing, I would say, maybe to come back to our conversation with Greg, it's exposing how little tooling individuals and organizations have around exploration.
I think that's a super interesting point, and I think very, very good observation that is probably the in. It's kind of like the thing that people are not seeing yet, which is
Mhm.
all these tools makes basically the factory work, and all this factory work that people have been doing can increasingly be done with agent. And so what is left, and that is the exploration, but the exploration doesn't really have a rule book. I realize there's innovation experts like yourself, but most of the time, that's not what most of the
Right,
organizations spend any time on. But now
right.
maybe they
Now
can,
you
maybe they
can.
should, and
And
that
and if you
maybe you
don't,
need
I
to.
mean, it's a race to the bottom, right? You can
Yeah.
only exploit, become so much more efficient before you're
Yeah.
basically at razor thin margins, and like you're cutting into bone. Like there's nothing left. There's no more fat to trim. And
Yeah.
so if your expertise is trimming the fat, eventually you're putting yourself out of business. I would be remiss if we didn't also mention one of the other things Greg mentioned to us, his emphasis on manifestos.
Mhm.
He mentioned, super companies. I wrote down three things. They have a manifesto, why AI. They give people access to great AI. And then 30 said everyone has access. And on that point around manifestos, just as a simple data point, because I really wanted to validate that statement, I was at a retreat of maybe 50 private equity CEOs a couple weeks ago. I did a similar, by the way, I've seen these findings I'm about to share replicated. I had a similar retreat among a bunch of CFOs and COOs. And at each of those three environments, I gave them, I call it my 26-point diagnostic. What are the key elements that need to be a part of an effective Gen AI powered transformation? And two of those elements are relevant to this conversation. One is, has the CEO written an AI manifesto? And two, has the organization established clear governance guidelines regarding use? Okay.
Hmm.
In each of these environments, both with CEOs and separately CFOs and separately COOs, a very clear pattern emerged, which is most organizations have a clear governance policy, and very few organizations have a leader who's crafted a bold ambition.
Yeah.
And all organizations are wondering, why are our people stalling out? And I actually put the data on the slide, data from the room. So not like general data, but actual, y'all just said this. And I put it on the room. And I mean, I lovingly, lightheartedly make fun of them. Like, wait, you guys are wondering why people are stalling out when 90% of you said we've told people what they're not allowed to do. And 10% of you have said, I've told people what I hope they do. Is there any wonder why people are
Yeah,
stalling
no,
out?
it's a good
Right?
point. But it's a little bit of the micro version of the same picture, which is, we know how to exploit, we don't know how to explore.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
that is going to be such a important part of living in an AI world where exploitation becomes cheaper and cheaper because the machines are very good at doing machine type work. I think, as always, if people have listened to the whole conversation with Greg, we hope they'll share this episode with somebody else.
One thing I will say, actually, just as we close, is folks should listen for the one thing they can do immediately. There is something they can do immediately that I've got written down here. I'm not gonna spoiler it. There is something you can do immediately, and it's not use Prof AI, though go check it out for sure. This isn't a product marketing thing. Um, you can actually do something immediately. And I'll just say this, it involves your calendar. That's all I'll say. Okay.
And with
With
that,
that,
bye bye.
bye-bye.